Some changes in your body arrive without warning. No sharp pain, no dramatic symptoms, nothing that stops you in your tracks. But they whisper quietly through your hands. Maybe you've noticed it. A slight tremble while lifting a glass of water. Fingers that feel unusually stiff in the morning, forcing you to rotate your wrist just to open a bottle. Nails that used to be strong now break with the gentlest touch. Or hands that feel dry and rough, even though you haven't changed your routine. Small things, easy to overlook. But after 70, your hands become more than tools. They're messengers. They reflect silent shifts in your hormones, nerves, liver, kidneys, and blood flow. What seems like just another sign of getting older might actually be your body waving a tiny red flag. Think back to the last time you rested your hands on the table and wondered, why do I feel weaker these days? Maybe it wasn't just tiredness. Maybe your hands were speaking, and you just didn't know how to listen. In today's story, we're going to uncover 6 subtle signs your hands might be sending you. Not to cause worry, but to help you notice what matters before it turns into something bigger. And by the end, you'll learn one simple way to check your hands at home. Something easy, especially useful if you live alone or skip regular doctor visits. Because the truth is, your hands are always talking. You just need to know what they're trying to say. Number 1, slight hand tremors. Rachel had always moved with quiet grace. Even in her 70s, her hands still tied ribbons with care, poured tea with elegance, and held her book steady as she read by the window each morning. But one day, as she reached for her cup, something felt off. The porcelain trembled ever so slightly in her fingers, not enough to spill, not enough to alarm, but enough to make her pause. She brushed it off at first. Maybe she was tired, or maybe her hands were just cold. But the next day, the same thing happened. Then again while brushing her teeth. Then again as she tried to button her cardigan. The tremor was small, barely noticeable unless she paid close attention, but it was there like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Rachel began to wonder if her body was trying to tell her something. She remembered a time when her mother had the same gentle shaking in her hands. The doctor had called it essential tremor, a harmless, inherited condition that often showed up in older age. It wasn't Parkinson's, he'd said. There was no stiffness, no slowness, no problems with balance. Just a quiet flutter in the fingers when the hands were still. But Rachel couldn't help but worry. Could it be something more? She read that tremors could also come from simple things: lack of sleep, stress, caffeine, low B vitamins, or even side effects from medications. She did drink tea on an empty stomach. Could that be it? She tried a test she found in an old health guide, writing a few lines on a piece of paper, then holding her hand out for 10 seconds. The tremor was light, no weakness, no clumsiness, just a soft vibration. Still, she knew better than to ignore it. Tremors after 70 might be common, but they're not meaningless. Rachel started keeping a little journal, noting when the shaking appeared, how long it lasted, and if it got worse. And she made herself a promise. If the tremor spread, grew stronger, or began interfering with her life, she would see a neurologist. Because sometimes the smallest shake can be the first whisper of something deeper, and Rachel had learned over the years that it's always better to listen early. Number 2, morning finger joint stiffness. Each morning as the sun peeked through the kitchen curtains, Rachel would prepare her tea, something she'd done for decades. But lately, her fingers didn't quite cooperate. She'd wake up to find them stiff and sluggish, as if they hadn't yet caught up with the rest of her. Turning the faucet felt harder. Gripping the teapot with one hand? Impossible. She began using both hands, not out of fear of dropping it, but simply because her fingers refused to move the way they used to. At first, she thought it was just a fluke. Maybe she had slept wrong. But the stiffness returned, day after day. It wasn't sharp or unbearable, just a dull tightness, a quiet resistance when she tried to bend her fingers or make a fist. It would take her a few minutes of slowly rotating her wrists, opening and closing her hands, before she could hold a cup without hesitation. Getting dressed, brushing her hair, everything felt a step slower, a bit heavier. Then she remembered a friend from her book club, Evelyn, who had once described something similar. Evelyn had been diagnosed with early-stage osteoarthritis, The doctor told her it was common for women over 60, especially those who had used their hands a lot in life. Typing, gardening, knitting, cooking. Rachel had done all of those things. Could it be the same? She started soaking her hands in warm water each morning, massaging her fingers with a drop of olive oil, gently coaxing her joints awake. The stiffness eased slightly, and she noticed the difference throughout the day. She made a point to stretch her hands every hour or so, rotate her wrists while waiting for the kettle to boil, and keep her fingers moving during phone calls. But in the back of her mind, a quiet thought remained. If the stiffness lasted longer than usual, if it started coming with pain or swelling, she'd visit a specialist. Not because she was afraid, but because she'd learned something important. When the hands whisper, it's wise to listen before they begin to shout. Number 3, brittle, discolored, or peeling nails. Rachel had always taken quiet pride in her hands. Though she never wore nail polish, her nails were usually smooth, healthy, and neatly trimmed. But one afternoon, while folding laundry, she noticed something odd. A fingernail had chipped clean off, without any pressure or reason. She paused, puzzled. When she looked closer, she saw faint vertical ridges along a few others. They looked dull, dry, and thinner than she remembered. At first, she blamed the cold weather. Maybe it was from washing dishes too often or forgetting to wear gloves in the garden. But even after using hand creams and being more careful, her nails kept splitting. Some began to curve slightly at the edges, and a few turned a pale, almost bluish color. It reminded her of a conversation she once had with her neighbor, Grace, who had gone through something similar. Grace's doctor had ordered a blood test and discovered she was mildly anemic. Her iron levels were too low. Rachel hadn't felt especially tired or weak, but she had lost a bit of weight lately without trying. Could her nails be trying to tell her something before any other symptoms showed up? She began paying closer attention to her meals, adding more leafy greens, eggs, and salmon to her plate. She swapped out tea for water, massaged a drop of olive oil into her nails before bed, and started wearing gloves for chores. But she also made an appointment with her doctor, not out of panic, but out of curiosity, just to be sure. Because what she'd learned over the years was simple. The body doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it whispers, and a fragile fingernail, barely holding on, might be that whisper, one that's easy to miss unless you're paying attention. Number 4, persistent dry or cracked hands. Rachel had always kept a small bottle of hand cream on her nightstand, a habit she picked up years ago, one she never thought twice about. But lately, no matter how often she applied it, her hands stayed dry, so dry that the skin on the backs of her hands began to flake and crack. She switched to a thicker cream, then another. She stopped using scented soaps and avoided hot water. Still, the dryness persisted, as if her skin had forgotten how to hold on to moisture. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was strange. Her climate wasn't dry, and she was drinking water throughout the day. Yet her hands felt like parchment, the tightness never quite going away. A few spots even bled slightly, like paper cuts appearing without cause. She remembered a man from her community center, Mr. Harris, who once mentioned the same thing. His hands had peeled and cracked no matter what he tried. It turned out he had undiagnosed diabetes, and the dryness was an early clue his body had been trying to send. Rachel's thoughts wandered. Could hers be from something deeper, too? She began adding flaxseed oil to her breakfast, drinking warm water in the mornings, and massaging coconut oil into her hands while they were still damp from washing. She was gentle, consistent, careful, but she also paid closer attention to other signals. Was she more tired than usual? Were her hands colder? Was this just aging or something more? Rachel knew the skin was more than just a surface. It reflected circulation, hydration, even hormonal balance. So when the cracks refused to heal and the dryness lingered, she scheduled a checkup, just to be sure. Not out of fear, but out of the quiet wisdom that had grown with her over the years. Because when your body begins to speak through your skin, it's not always looking for lotion. Sometimes it's asking you to listen a little deeper. Number 5, numbness or tingling at night. It started as a strange sensation in the middle of the night. Rachel would wake up, hand tucked under her pillow, her fingers buzzing with a soft tingling, as if tiny pins were pricking her skin. She'd shake her hand gently, rub it, and within minutes the feeling would fade. At first, she thought little of it. Just a bad sleeping position, she told herself. But then it happened again and again. Some nights, both hands, always the same fingers, thumb, index, middle, falling asleep before the rest of her. Soon she began to notice it during the day too. Holding a book for too long, typing on her tablet, even stirring soup. Her grip would suddenly feel weaker, her hands slightly numb. Rachel couldn't ignore it anymore. She remembered her old friend Linda, a retired piano teacher, who had once mentioned something similar. Linda was eventually diagnosed with carpal tunnel syndrome. Years of fine finger movement had compressed the median nerve in her wrist. It hadn't required surgery, just awareness. Linda had worn a wrist brace at night and changed a few habits, and the symptoms eased. So Rachel began paying attention. She stopped tucking her hands under her pillow. She avoided bending her wrists sharply while reading or gardening. At night, she tried a soft brace to keep her hand in a neutral position. And she made a list. Was she getting enough B vitamins? Was her posture adding pressure to her spine or nerves? Still, if the tingling didn't stop, she knew what she had to do. A visit to a neurologist wouldn't hurt. Because while these nighttime whispers felt harmless now, they could grow louder with time. Rachel had learned this. Your body doesn't always shout. Sometimes it nudges you awake at 2 a.m. with a tingling hand, asking gently, "Are you paying attention?" Number 6. Red palms or prominent veins. Rachel noticed it one quiet afternoon while folding laundry. The base of her palms looked redder than usual. Not irritated, not itchy, just flushed, warm, and slightly glowing beneath the skin. At first she blamed the heat from the dryer, but the redness didn't fade. In fact, by evening, it seemed more pronounced. Over the next week, she caught herself glancing at her hands often. The redness lingered below her thumbs and along the outer edges of her palms. Her veins, once barely visible, now traced faint blue lines across the backs of her hands, more obvious than before. She hadn't done anything different. No new soaps, no allergies, no heavy lifting. Just this odd, persistent change. Rachel's thoughts drifted to Samuel, a gentleman from her local walking group. He once mentioned that his doctor found early-stage liver issues, not because he felt sick, but because his palms had turned red. It was something called palmar erythema, he said, an early sign the liver might not be filtering hormones and toxins properly. Samuel didn't drink, didn't feel unwell, but long-term medication had slowly stressed his liver. Could Rachel be seeing the same sign? She hadn't felt especially tired, but now that she thought about it, her appetite had dipped lately, a few pounds lost without trying. She made a mental note. If the redness stayed for more than 2 weeks, she'd speak to her doctor. Just a simple liver function test, just to be safe. In the meantime, she watched her hands a little more closely, not with fear, but with respect. They were, after all, the part of her body that touched everything first. And now, they might be quietly revealing what her deeper systems couldn't say out loud. Because sometimes, your hands don't just hold the story of your life, they hold clues to what's happening beneath the surface. You only have to look. The quiet wisdom of your hands. Rachel sat by the window, the late afternoon sun casting gentle light across her palms. She turned her hands over slowly, studying the lines, the skin, the small changes that had once seemed unimportant. But now she saw them differently, not as signs of aging, but as messages. Soft signals her body had been sending all along. None of the symptoms had shouted. They arrived as whispers, tremors, stiffness, dryness, tingling, color. Easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. But each one had meaning. Each one offered a small window into something deeper. She realized it wasn't about fear. It wasn't about expecting illness at every turn. It was about learning to understand herself in a new way. After 70, strength wasn't about lifting more or walking farther. It was about paying attention, knowing when to rest, when to ask questions, when to check in, when to listen. For Rachel, her hands had become a kind of compass, a way to stay connected to her health, quietly and simply. No doctors required, no fancy tools, just awareness, just a few moments each week to observe, to feel, to notice. Because aging doesn't take away your power. If anything, it gives you a new kind, the power to notice earlier, to act sooner, to care more gently. And sometimes that's all you need to stay one step ahead. In the end, Rachel knew one thing for sure. Her hands had never failed her, and now she would never fail to listen to them. So the next time you pause to wash your hands, button your shirt, or hold a warm cup of tea, take a moment to really see them. Your hands have been with you through everything: work, love, loss, laughter. They've built, held, comforted, and carried. And now they're speaking again, not with words, but with subtle changes, gentle hints, quiet truths. Don't rush past them. Let each small sign be a reminder. Your body is always talking, and you are still very much in tune with it, if you choose to listen. If this video helped you look at your hands in a new way, consider sharing it with someone you care about, because sometimes all it takes is a simple glance to catch something early, and that can change everything. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind to yourself, and never stop paying attention to the small things. They often say the most.